Oh, well, hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today I am continuing the second story within the new Netflix anthology trilogy, Fear Street, based on the R.L. Stine series of books. Now, as this is a continuation, my discussion analysis will have the air of a continuation, so I apologise if I refer back to things from the first week and you haven't seen the video of it. But I have to say, I don't know whether it's a change in my mood, whether there's just something about the era in which this is set, or whether, I don't know, there's just something more interesting about the story that now that we've had the foundation from the first week and we've picked it up. But I have to say, Fear Street Part 2, 1978, I significantly preferred to 1994, I think was Part 1. Yeah, I had a much stronger connection to this film than I did to the first part. I found the characters more relatable. I found the horror just that little bit more interesting. I don't know, there was something about it that clearly resonated with me much more than it did for the first week. So, just to sort of give a précis of it, we pick up with our characters, our surviving characters, from episode or part 1, which is Dina, her brother, and her girlfriend. Her girlfriend currently being possessed or driven mad by the evil witch spirit, Seraphina, and they've gone to visit the only previously known survivor of this curse that's afflicted the Shadyside residents, which is a character known as C. Bentham, believed to be Cynthia, Burnman or Burn, something like that. Played by, in a fairly small and yet noticeable for me role of Gillian Jacobs, of Community fame, whose career I semi-regular follow, and so it was a pleasure to see her pop up and kind of gave this a bit of validity for me. But her role is fairly short because these characters go to her to try and find out how to end this curse, at which point she recounts her story, which then flashes back to 1978, where it's about her and her sister at a summer camp, and all the teenagers at that summer camp, both counsellors and attendees. And yeah, as I say, there's just something about it that's just that I just found a little bit more relatable. It's possibly era-based, where I have trouble with. Okay, the thing that I said in the first week, and I continue to support, is the idea that the makers of this are incredibly cine literate. 1994 really tries to capture and homage the horror styles that were popular around that time. The primary source being Scream, but the sort of the feeling of a 90s slasher, whereas this, of course, has more of a 70s slasher vibe. And I don't know if, because I personally, and as I've said in previous horror discussions, I find the 90s one of the weaker, if not weakest, eras in horror history, going back to like the 60s onwards. That I've always felt that it is made, with some exceptions, obviously Wes Craven and his work, and other films that do stand out, that the 90s is a real difficult time in horror history. because it's the point in which characters like Freddy and Jason and Michael were starting to really, you know, overstay their welcome in terms of their franchises. We transitioned out of sort of the video nasties era, and so there just wasn't the same grittiness, the same dirtiness that suited horror in the 90s. And so the style of horror and the things that they homage, and therefore the style of Fear Street Part 1, really just, I don't know, it wasn't clicking with me. And it felt more like 1994 via 2021. The characters didn't feel that dissimilar to characters that we would know today, and I think that's something I just wasn't getting on board with. In 1978, the characters do feel era appropriate. It does feel like a period piece, and it does, as I say, it homages the horror of the time. You know, so of course the obvious one being Friday the 13th being, of course, its primary source. But of course, you know, the camp horror, as in the summer camp horror of that time, was very popular. And so you've got a whole smattering of slasher horrors of that style that really suit this kind of storytelling, and you can tell there's a love and craft and knowledge that goes there. Of course, this is an interesting horror anthology, I realise, is because what we are seeing is a repeating pattern, both in terms of the storytelling but also characterisation. So, of course, the primary structuring of it is the same, which is it's part standard psycho slasher, where you have this unempathetic killer who seems to be unstoppable and seems to kill with no rhyme or reason, on the one hand, who appears to be human, but then their humanity goes further and further into question, a la Friday the 13th or Michael Myers. But then, of course, both of these parts, of course, touch upon the supernatural element of it, the witch curse and the witch spirit, and the way that she sort of affected this community. And it seems to do both fair. I mean, it does, obviously, it's much more invested in the slasher as its primary horror source, with the sort of the spirit stuff being more a motivator. But it really works well, because the idea, and I was worried going into this one, because of course part 1 tells you the events of what happens in 1978. Of course, it doesn't go into any detail, but it outlines who lived, who died, and sort of the you know, who the killer was in that scenario. And so looping back around and having this 1978 story, knowing who the killer is, getting the same kind of characters to some degree. You have the sort of isolated loner, very much like Dina in the first one. You have the sort of wild child drug-taking partnership from the first one, where in the first one it was two friends who were just drug dealers. In this one, it's a couple in a relationship, and they're sort of stoner types who are hard partiers who are really doubling down on the sex and drugs of it all. And then, of course, you have that same confrontation between the Shady Siders and the Sunnyvale, I want to say, the Sunnyvalers, as in the Sunnyvalers being these sort of upper middle class types who aren't being affected by the curse, and the tension between the two communities who seem to be constantly intertwined. But here, like I say, even though it's a repeating motif and we're getting this same pattern and we know what happens, there's a nuance in this. There's the fact that we've sort of seen the same characters, but these characterizations are slightly different, and obviously a period accurate. And I think I significantly prefer the setting and the way the characters interact with that setting more than I did with the 90s one. And I just, yeah, I do think that it just sits really well. And admittedly, the first one, I can't criticise the level of sort of their attempt at really going for that adult horror. My criticism last week was the fact that it was Goosebumps, but sex and violence were there. And I didn't feel that sense of having a more mature horror. With this one, it's the same, and yet, and again, this may be a subjective thing, a personal thing, because I know part one has gone down quite well critically, but this, again, having the sex and the violence feels more in place here. It feels more in keeping with sort of the Friday the 13th style of horror. And so yeah, it just all these elements really worked quite well for me. And so when you have the sort of more soap opera melodrama aspects of it, I was actually much more invested in sort of the tension between these two sisters, one who is sort of, like I say, the loner outsider, and the other one who's trying to intermingle herself with the Sunnyvale student who's trying to be a bit more preppy, a bit more, trying to raise herself above her station, and the tension that creates between them. The fact that you also have these kids who are just the worst. Like, there's this one girl who honestly has the biggest vendetta, and you get that sense of like almost Lord of the Flies-esque elements to it, where even though you have these counsellors, the counsellors are barely older than the oldest attendees, students. And so, and it's some of them who are being the most vile and most aggressive. And so it feels like the counsellors barely have control over them. And so, like I said, there's this sort of Lord of the Flies-esque dynamic going on. But yeah, I really like this one. This was quite fun for me. And if it is sort of, I'm hoping it's sort of, escalating returns as opposed to diminishing returns, that, I know part 3 is set in 1666, so it's going for your much more period horror in the sense of more hopefully in the style of something like The Witch. So I'm really hoping that this pays off, and actually when you come to the end of the Fear Street story, it does actually, together the 3 parts do tell this really compelling story. I mean, the cliffhanger was interesting for this one, and I am intrigued to see exactly how that'll play out. I'm a little worried there's a sort of quantum leap aspect to it, but we'll see. And again, of course, these always end with a trailer for the next part, and the trailer, even though the cliffhanger I didn't find hugely engaging, the trailer for next week I did, and I was quite intrigued because of the tone and style of it. But yeah, so significant improvement. So far, so good. I'm looking forward to talking about part 3 next week. Okay, well, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because it's all helping the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of almost 200 videos. We're getting closer and closer to that 200 mark. And follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.